So the summer movie season has come to a close. It's time to go back to school, and that means today I'm going to stop and rank all 29 summer 2019 movies I saw from the worst to the best. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Sean Chandler, and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place and consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all of the summer 2019 movies that you saw. We're not going to agree. I liked some movies you didn't like. You liked some movies that I didn't like. That's awesome. Just don't be a weirdo down below. Also, I only included theatrically released movies, and my definition of the summer movie season is the first big blockbuster of the season that kind of defined the summer. That would be Endgame, all the way up to the final kind of big movie that came out, and that would be the Angry Birds movie 2 that comes out today. One final thing before we get started, people constantly ask me, where do I get my posters? Where do I get my Funko Pops? And what equipment do I use? There's a link down below that has informs you about a lot of that stuff, where you can pick them up. With that said, let's get started. Coming in last place, and it pains me to say this, Dark Phoenix. This was a mediocre rehash of a bunch of X-Men plot lines and story arcs that we've seen before. It seemed like half the cast didn't want to be there. The villain inside of it was as bland, boring, and forgettable as you can imagine. And even the characters inside of it that weren't necessarily acting poorly, the characters were not acting like themselves. So this was just a painfully mediocre conclusion to the X-Men Fox saga. Coming in at number 28 is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This is one of these movies where I feel like I saw a different film than everyone else, because a bunch of people really liked it. And I totally can respect that. That just wasn't my experience with the film. I thought the storytelling was clunky. I really didn't think they nailed their target demographic. I couldn't figure out who this movie was for or who I would recommend it to. And then likewise, I thought the creature designs were awkward, strange, or looked bad because of the CGI special effects that they chose to use for them. So for me, this was a movie that had elements that I kind of liked about it, but for the most part, I was just kind of bored throughout the film and waiting for it to be over. Next up is The Kitchen, another late addition to this list, and a movie that kind of just touches all of the generic beats that you expect inside of a mob movie like this, except it stars women. It's from the perspective of women, and so it kind of plays off the idea of they just belong in the kitchen, except they are running Hell's Kitchen. Beyond that little twist on the genre, it's very much by the numbers. It also tries to do some kind of girl power type stuff, but the behavior that they're trying to treat as empowering is actually incredibly toxic, illegal, and deadly behavior. And so there's a bunch of things about it that it just didn't come together in the end. Number 26 is Shaft. Now, I wasn't bored by this film. I enjoyed this genre a good bit. This is like Samuel L. Jackson cranked up to 11, doing his shtick for about an hour and a half, and I can have fun with that. I mean, beyond that, the basic story to it, it's pretty generic cop investigation type movie. It's a film that feels very odd inside of the franchise that it's inside of, because the original Shaft from 45 years ago is nothing like this, tonally speaking. It's not even like the previous Samuel L. Jackson Shaft film. So it's a very odd film, not boring, not really good film, but a movie that's tough to nail down who exactly it's for. Number 25 is Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Now this movie provides plenty of monster mayhem. Godzilla makes lots of appearances where he battles a whole bunch of different monsters inside of the film. It's jam-packed with actors that you like to see on screen. The actual plot here, not necessarily the best. And there's in particular one of the characters inside of it that they totally misread what the audience is going to want them to do with this character by the time you get to the final moments inside of the film. So it's a movie that if you're in the mood for monster mayhem, this movie will deliver the monster mayhem that you want. Not a whole lot more than that. Then we've got Dora and the Lost City of Gold. Now, I'm not the target audience for a Dora the Explorer film. I've never seen any of the cartoons, but I do have children, so I took my whole family to go see this one opening day. And it's a good enough little adventure for the whole family. It's not the train wreck that some of the trailers made it out to be. It's kind of, National Treasure, Indiana Jones for kids. I mean, there's a lot of like fart jokes inside of it that's kind of very much low-hanging fruit. So it's not going to win any awards. It's not the best of anything. it's a passable enough way to spend some time. Number 23 is Midsummer. This is a tough one for me because I absolutely do respect the technical prowess of the director here and how he framed the shots, the color scheme, the way he hinted at certain things, even the way that he's able to get under your skin inside certain sequences inside of the film. But when it comes to the simple fact, did I enjoy the movie? Would I rewatch it again? Who would I recommend it to? It's a movie that I wouldn't want to watch again. Even on a plot level, it seemed like it played out pretty straightforward. For all its technical prowess, all its weirdness to it, you figure out very early on exactly what's going to happen, who it's going to happen to. The foreshadowing is much more like just kind of predictability at a certain point in time, especially the more I thought about it, I was like, that was actually just predictable. That wasn't like clever foreshadowing or anything like that. So it's a movie that I understand why some people would watch it and be like, oh, that was brilliant. It was not brilliant to me. And number 22 is Brightburn. Now, this was a movie I was very excited about going into it because it's a little bit of if you took the Superman mythology, turned it on its head and turned it into a horror film and you made Kal-El, Clark Kent, into this evil character. That's the premise of this movie. I loved the idea of that. And the final end result is a pretty straightforward version of exactly that. In which case I was like, oh, that was kind of cool, but it didn't live up to all the potential it could have had. Beyond the cleverness of the original concept, I didn't find there was cleverness in the execution of the concept, and so I left pretty disappointed. It wasn't bad. I didn't dislike the film. I just left underwhelmed because I thought they could have done something so much more with this or had some clever ideas and how it all played together. That's just a pretty direct version of the concept. Next up is The Secret Life of Pets 2. This is some harmless family entertainment. Essentially, the first 2 acts of the film are just a bunch of different vignettes about animals doing cute type things that are just kind of fun to watch. And then they kind of come together in the 3rd act. It becomes this action finale inside of it. You know, there's nothing brilliant here. There's nothing amazing about it, but it was fun enough. It's the type of movie that if my kids were like, hey, I want to watch this, I wouldn't mind watching it again. It's also not a film that I would choose to watch on my own, but as a parent, it's one that I wouldn't mind if my kids got into it. Bringing us into the top 20 is the Angry Birds movie 2. This is another movie that I probably wouldn't choose to watch on my own, but if my kids wanted to watch it, I'd be totally fine with it. I think this was also a pretty big improvement over the original film. I thought it had a tighter story, much more focused narrative. They did kind of the spy heist type film where, you know, the 2 factions from the first film team up to take out the 3rd island. And because of that, it was a pretty fun little ride. There's some pretty harsh jokes inside of the film. There's some low-hanging fruit, some crass body function PP jokes. Besides that, good enough. At number 19 is Annabelle Comes Home. This is probably the lightest film inside of the Conjuring universe. Not that it's a light film, it's still got demons and all that kind of fun stuff. There's a little bit more humor thrown into the mix. The Warren family I find always to be pretty charming and amusing inside of these films, but it's also just not as heavy as the other one, so it might be the most, for me, rewatchable of the films inside of this universe, but it's also playing to the very standard bag of tricks for this genre. Lots of jump scares, lots of people walking down dark hallways with ominous music as you wait for something to pop out in front of you. So nothing brilliant here, but a pretty good time if you're in the mood for like a red box horror film. Coming in at number 18 is Men in Black International. This is a big budget blockbuster that checks off all the boxes that you're supposed to have for a movie like this. You got the A-list stars, you got tons of special effects, you got all the jokes thrown into the mix, but it just feels like a well-produced attempt at making a Men in Black film. It's not bad. I actually thought some of the stuff about the plot was a bit better than the previous 2 sequels inside of the franchise, but it doesn't have that spark of creativity and how it brings all this to life. I mean, you even have inside a Men in Black film, Chris Hemsworth getting in fist fights and shooting actual pistols at times. And that's the kind of movie that's frustrating because it's a franchise known for its creativity, its quirkiness, its weirdness, and this just seems like such a typical blockbuster version of it. And so it left me Not bored, not hating it, but wishing that they'd had a little bit more creative spark with it. Then we have Late Night. This is a dramedy with Mindy Kaling and Emma Thompson as this late night host. Mindy Kaling coming in as a new writer on her staff, kind of churning things upside down. It touches on some familiar beats such as films like Working Girl, Morning Glory, but it's still charming enough, cute enough. It's a movie that I had a good time with. I was like, oh, this is pretty good, nice, and kind of forgot about it after watching it. Even though some of the ways things kind of played out in the second half of the film I thought was structured pretty nicely and paid off pretty well, overall, the experience of it didn't make that big of an impact on me. Number 16 is Aladdin. The original film came out when I was in elementary school. It was one of those films that defined my childhood. So when they announced this film was coming out, I got pretty nervous about it because I don't know how you replace Robin Williams. I don't know how you do it live action. And then they said Will Smith was going to be the genie. I was like, all right, I kind of like that. But then also Guy Ritchie was directing it. I didn't know what to make of that. As it turns out, Will Smith really was the best thing about the film. Whenever he's on screen, everything gets better. He kind of pulls the whole thing together to make it work. It was good enough before he appeared in the film. But overall, it's a movie that I think because of that Will Smith flavor does just enough to kind of warrant its existence. Coming in at number 15 is Booksmart. Now, this is a movie that a bunch of people had praised to me as one of the best of the year and one of the funniest of the year. I kind of went in with high expectations, and I kind of went in knowing this movie's probably not going to be for me, as I'm not a big fan of the underage kids try to get to a party and do drugs along the way genre. It's just not a genre for me. It doesn't resonate with me. But even beyond that, some of the attitudes of the characters inside of it, towards grades, college, everything just didn't resonate with my experience with high school, how I thought about anything. Just the value sets, there's just no overlap. Not that it was a poorly made film. Some of the sequences are very well directed. I certainly laughed out loud. It's just not a movie that I loved the way that a bunch of other people loved, and that tends to be the case with this genre. I don't praise any of these movies the way some people seem to praise them. Number 14 is Crawl. This is a pretty straightforward and effective creature thriller about two people stuck in the crawl space underneath a house in the middle of a hurricane with some alligators. It's a movie that knows exactly what it is, and it delivers the thrills, the scares, the excitement that you want from this type of film. It's not like trying to be the best of anything. It's not trying to blow your mind. It just delivers the simple intensity, edge of your seat excitement that you want. So it does its job. It's not necessarily my genre exactly, so it's not a movie that I was like, wow, I love that, but it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Next up is Child's Play. This is a movie to me that I feel it almost was hurt by the fact that they called it Child's Play as opposed to just kind of doing their own little doll come to life story, because a lot of people, I think, prejudged it based off the fact that it's such a reimagining of the Chucky mythology from what we saw before, which was so voodoo-based, and this is AI-based, and it's totally different things. But it does some really nice things by doing this reimagining, whereas the film's actually about the friendship between Andy and Chucky in its own ways, and Chucky's demented view of friendship and his own robot jealousy. So I thought the movie actually worked pretty well for what it was. Then we have Detective Pikachu. Now, I'm someone that, besides my children loving Pokemon, I don't really have much of a background with Pokemon, so I just went into this essentially as someone looking to watch a fun blockbuster, and that's what I got. You get plenty of opportunities for Ryan Reynolds to do PG-13 Ryan Reynolds as Detective Pikachu inside of it. You get some fun creature designs, you get some big action sequences. The specific detective plot itself is pretty by the numbers. It's predictable at times, but at the same time, it's a very good time at the movies. I'm actually going to rewatch it tonight since I bought it today. Coming in at number 11 is Stuber. This is a buddy cop action comedy that I just got a kick out of. We don't get a whole lot of rated R action comedies anymore, and so this was a pleasant surprise for me that we got one that has Dave Bautista and Kumail Nanjiani teaming up to have a lot of fun. Now, it's certainly comedy first, action second, but the comedy all worked for me. Whether it's doing the banter between the two characters, there's a whole bunch of Dave Bautista's slapstick physical comedy inside it. I actually thought it worked really well, and the setup for the movie movie justified what was happening. Kumail Nanjiani's kind of comedic timing and his little one-liners and playing off each of their different personas I thought worked really nicely. It's also got a bunch of action inside of it that some of it's handled really well. Like there's some tracking shots where Dave Bautista jumps off a balcony. They got Eco from The Raid inside of it facing off against Dave Bautista many times inside of the film. So a bunch of stuff to enjoy. I mean, it is just a generic buddy action comedy, but sometimes that's all you need to be entertained, and this one certainly entertained me. Kicking off our top 10 is Long Shot, a rom-com of sorts about a political tour with Seth Rogen, Charlize Theron. Thought the comedy worked, the relationships worked, the chemistry was really nice between everybody, and it was a movie that also seemed to do a pretty good job of balancing, having broad appeal while at the same time tackling a little bit of politics inside of it. So a movie that I had a good time with when I watched it for the first time actually last week. Next up is Yesterday, a charming little film about an insane concept where a guy gets injured, the power goes out, he wakes up, and almost everyone in the world no longer knows who the Beatles are, and so he's the one person that remembers their songs and becomes a world-famous musician using the catalog of the Beatles. I just had a blast with this film. It's unassuming, it's got a cast that you really enjoy, they all have their own personalities that you just want all of them to succeed other than the evil producer person inside of it. Besides that, just kind of an uplifting, fun sort of film. It doesn't necessarily all come together in the end to the most satisfying conclusion, but I enjoyed the ride. And the music while on the ride. At number 8 is Spider-Man Far From Home. Like all MCU films, it's a ton of fun. This one might be the funniest film inside of the MCU. Jake Gyllenhaal gives a great performance. Tom Holland is, of course, great inside of these films as well. The reason it's not like a top 5 for me is that I just thought that they had some pretty big missteps with the story, as well as even kind of the tone inside of it. All the stuff about the glasses, I just don't think it made any sense that Tony would make the decision that he made in light of what Peter Parker does in the film immediately upon getting them, what he does in the middle of the film. Everything indicates that Tony made the wrong decision, but the movie keeps telling us that he made the right choice. It just doesn't make any sense, especially in light of some of the other people inside of Tony's life that he could have handed this off to, as well as the movie undercuts its credibility to go for a laugh on a few too many occasions. On some of the spy stuff, I mean, there's 4 different sequences where someone's in the middle of changing, usually Peter Parker, and people walk in. Nick Fury's even involved in some of this stuff, and just that cuts away the film's credibility. The whole bus drone sequence I thought was just too over the top. So I just thought it had some missteps. I know a lot of you loved it. A bunch of you have it as maybe your favorite Spider-Man film. It just wasn't that for me. Still a very enjoyable film. Then we have Rocketman, the Elton John biopic fantasy musical film that I just thought was put together in such a creative and energetic fashion that matched the personality that is Elton John. This is kind of more what I wanted Bohemian Rhapsody to be, whereas I thought that was a little bit too straightforward, and they took the exuberance of Queen and squished it into the biopic template formula that every movie follows. This one seemed to have the liveliness that you would expect from Elton John's life. You see that here, and so I really enjoyed this film. Coming in at number 6 is The Lion King. Now, I know a lot of you did not like this film, thought it was a very bland, direct translation of the classic animated film into this photorealistic animated style, as well as a lot of you had big issues with the fact that because they're photorealistic animals, they can't really emote, and that meant the story felt lifeless. I can understand all of that. That just wasn't my experience with it. I was wowed by the technological achievement of the whole thing, and I just love the Lion King story and the songs and all of it. It's my favorite animated film of all time, and so this to me felt like a cover version of my favorite song. It's not as good as the original. Doesn't have the magic of the original, but I thought it was sung really well. So for me, it worked. Bringing us into our top 5 is John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum. Once again, they up the ante of what you can do with an action movie in the 21st century and establishing that this is the premier action franchise of this decade. Keanu Reeves is just as good, if not better than he's ever been. They really did some stuff that I have no clue how they were able to choreograph some of this stuff. They did stunts inside of it that I've never seen anything shot like this before, with how long some of these takes are, how wide the shots were, with dogs getting involved, motorcycle chases, some truly incredible stunt work inside of this film. I thought they kind of, with the story, they stretched some things out longer than they needed to, and they should have resolved some of the plot lines in this film, inside of this film, and that left a little bit of a sour taste inside of my mouth, but it absolutely delivered on the most important part, which was the action, and it is just insanely phenomenal action in this film. At number 4, Fast and Furious presents Hobbs and Shaw. This to me was the Taco Bell movie, the Taco Supreme for summer 2019. It is dumb. And if you saw the trailer and thought, that's a dumb movie right there, you'll see the movie and you'll think, that was the dumbest movie I've ever seen. It strains all credibility. It just throws it out the window, and it just has fun with the concept of these two characters, The Rock, Jason Statham, fighting together, fighting each other, the banter, the one-liners, the insult battles, all of it, I ate it all up. It is absolute cinematic junk food. It is absolute cinematic fast food, and I could gobble it up all day long. I mean, it goes for cheap entertainment, but it is delicious cheap entertainment for me. This might be the most just pure fun I have had at the movies this entire year. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember to share your ranking down below in the comment section. I know you disagreed with a lot of my picks. That's awesome. It would be boring if we agreed on everything. So just don't be weird. Don't be a jerk down below in the comment section. Let's have a fun conversation as movie lovers. Also, if you enjoyed this video, check out this video right here up above once this one's done, where I give my picks for the best, the worst, the biggest disappointments, and the biggest surprises of the first half of 2019. If you enjoyed this video, you will enjoy that video as well. In third place is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, this one's been interesting because it seems to be kind of polarizing audiences a good bit. A bunch of people saw the film and were very frustrated by the lack of plot and then just sudden insanity in the last 20 minutes of the film. As for me, I enjoyed what Tarantino was going for, which is essentially he wanted to play around with his favorite set of toys, which would be the 1960s Hollywood. And so he just had fun with it and did his version of it and did his own fantasy version of how he wished 1969 had played out. And along the way, you get some great characters, some great Tarantino dialogue. So while it might not be this story-driven film, I enjoyed hanging out in this space that he wanted to play around in. And then I loved the last 20 minutes of it. When it just goes bonkers, I loved what they did, how he set the pieces up to build up to that finale. All of it worked for me. I had a great time with it, but I really do understand why a lot of people didn't. And I've been struggling as some people have asked me if they should go see it. It's like, I don't really know, because some people are loving it, some people are hating it, and I can't really tell who's going to fall into which category. Our runner-up is Toy Story 4. Now, this is a movie that I didn't want. I was complaining about it as soon as they announced it. I didn't like the trailers for it. It was not on my most anticipated list because it just felt so unnecessary, and we saw such a good finale in Toy Story 3, and within the first 10 minutes of this film, I felt that they justified the film's existence. I understood what they were going for and why it needed to happen and how this was a logical continuation of what had happened before. And then it might be the funniest movie inside of the franchise. The themes inside of it resonated with me as a parent, as an adult, on a pretty deep emotional level. So this to me was a movie that absolutely belonged inside the franchise. I'm kind of confused as to why they marketed it the way that they did. I don't think they did a good job of winning over some of the skeptics like myself, and I think the movie could win over the skeptics better than the marketing did. But yeah, I thought it was a fantastic film. But coming in first place is Avengers Endgame. Now, this is a movie I had a few issues with. It's not my #1 film inside of the MCU, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a movie that has one of the most satisfying final 40 minutes of any film that's ever been made, because it does such a great job of concluding this massive 11-year-long saga, these massive character arcs, and they just did such a wonderful job of earning fan service and just delivering a truly epic film. And so while when compared to certain other MCU films, there's some things that knock it back just a little bit. When it comes to just comparing it to other big blockbusters, this to me was pretty easily the blockbuster that comes out on top. This is the one that I'll be talking about, that I'll be rewatching, the one that drew out the most excitement and biggest emotions. So easily, without question, for all of the obvious reasons, for all the reasons that a bunch of you guys have it at number 1, Avengers Endgame comes in at number 1. If you want more content like this, remember to check out that video right over there. If you want to know about the posters, the Funkos, or the gear I use, check out that link down below. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.